I want to be a Maccabee, so big and brave and bold. I want to be a Maccabee, but I'm only 4 years old. Now, I've taught that song to generations of preschoolers. Who doesn't love Judah Maccabee, the Hebrew hammer? With his band of brothers, he miraculously triumphed over a giant army and enabled Jews to worship in our temple with freedom. How wonderful it was as a child to have a hero so fearless, so unequivocally awesome. But once I became an adult, the story got a little more complicated. I learned that the Maccabees weren't just fighting the Syrian Greek army, they were also killing fellow Jews. The Maccabees were enraged at the Jews who were adapting Hellenistic culture, joining gymnasiums, taking on Greek names, foregoing what they considered authentic Judaism. Looked at with adult eyes, well, the Maccabees, despite their unquestionable bravery against Antiochus and the whole army, they were also an intolerant band of zealots who began a civil war against assimilated Jews. Maybe I needed a new hero. David, Melech Israel, King David. Now there is a hero. He began as a simple shepherd and a marvelous musician. Young David fought Goliath, and with wit and courage, he brought that giant to the ground. And then he went on to become the greatest king of Israel. And he established Jerusalem as our holy eternal capital. And he managed to unite a disparate monarchy. Chai, chai, v'kayam. Long, long may he live. But once I started studying the Hebrew Bible, you know the parts they leave out of the children illustrated versions? Well, that story got a little more complicated. I found out with horror that this hero of the Jewish people lusted after a married woman, abused his power to sleep with her, and then he sent her husband onto the front lines to be killed. I was singing and teaching a children's song about an abusive and murderous tyrant. How many times have our heroes turned out to be more complicated humans? How many times have we had to learn the hard lesson that no story is just one story? That there can be those who do incredible good while also doing monstrous harm. That both can reside within a single person or within an institution. Just this month, Hebrew Union College, the Reform Movement's rabbinical and cantorial seminary, published the report of its independent investigation into allegations of sexual harassment and gender bias at the college throughout its history. Over 170 interviews exposed abuses of power, damaging sexism, homophobia, among many other issues. And it singled out 6 faculty, including 2 presidents of the college, for repeated inappropriate sexual behavior. Both of those presidents served while I was a student at HUC. This is an overdue reckoning with leaders who abuse their positions of authority and hurt people who looked up to them, often with very few consequences for their position, but with devastating impact on the survivors. And so, after learning all of this, what do we do? This is not just a question for HUC or even for Central Synagogue when we undertook our own recent investigation into inappropriate sexual behavior by a former senior rabbi. This is an essential conversation today as we deal time and time again with figures who often exemplified compelling leadership, but also committed devastating moral crimes. Do we take down every statue and every picture? Do we erase them from our history books? Do we expunge anything that they ever taught in light of the sins that we now know? Well, our tradition's treatment of King David gives us a wise Torah for thinking about how we might deal with extremely complicated legacies. In the Psalms, and we sang at least one of them in Kabbalat Shabbat tonight, you can read how deeply David reckoned with the gravity of his transgressions, his self-loathing, his true remorse, and his humility. David repents, but God still metes out punishment. God doesn't allow David his most desired legacy of being able to build the holy temple in Jerusalem because David has too much blood on his hands. Our tradition sends a strong message that actions must have consequences. In a later text from the Talmud, King David bargains with God over his permanent record. With each verse, he owns up to his offense, and he repeatedly begs, "Please forgive me." For each of David's actions, including the worst of them, God responds, "These are forgiven." How remarkable that our tradition offers us such a forgiving God. But then David boldly asks God, and I'm paraphrasing, "Now can you just please not put that stuff into the Bible?" And God says, "That I cannot do." In our tradition, we can forgive, but we don't forget. Our tradition's treatment of King David gives us a model for today. First, a perpetrator must atone, and that entails true repentance to the person that they harmed. And there should be consequences for bad actions. Saying "I'm sorry" is not enough. But at the same time, we do not erase or discard human beings forever. And despite the current movement to tear down any traces of leaders who have the stain of past sins, our tradition says it is incumbent upon us to remember their actions, all of them. Judaism does not offer us the flawless heroes we all crave. Flawless heroes don't exist because they're all human. And more critically, Jewish tradition teaches us that often the more charismatic and powerful that people are, the more prone to abuses of that power. And this story is as old as the Bible. I also learned through Central's own investigation that when we are not honest about the complicated nature of our leaders, we actually make it much harder to stop abuse. When someone thinks of a sexual predator, they often imagine the stranger who jumps out of the bushes, not their beloved rabbi or favorite camp counselor or teacher. But these respected figures can sometimes be perpetrators. Predators, more often than not, are people who know how to gain trust, whose charisma makes them feel untouchable, a person so well regarded that their victims fear they will not be believed if they come forward, and feel conflicted about exposing someone who everybody loves so much. Survivors also feel shame, especially when there was no physical coercion, but instead the emotional manipulation of a leader they admired who made them feel special. Here is one more very complicated thing that our tradition forces us to grapple with. The idea that the future Messiah will come from the line of King David. Instead of immaculate conception, we teach that the figure who ushers in the Messianic era, a time when no one will abuse power over another, will come from the line of one of our leaders who committed the gravest of sins, from the progeny of King David. Perhaps our tradition is telling us that it is from the depths of our darkest chapters that we must find light. This is, of course, the message of this Hanukkah season. We should not remove the stories of our flawed leaders from our canon or from our history books. That would leave a hole that only creates more darkness. Instead, we should bring these stories into the light. We should offer a path towards accountability and potential healing and repentance. We should record and retell to ensure that we teach and protect the next generation. It is only in facing the darkness head on that we can hope to bring forth the promise of a more redemptive time.